Welcome everyone to the Q&A Cafe. I want to say we're recording this, like, what is it, 5 days after the blizzard. So if you're here, special commendation, because it's not easy to get around the city right now. But I'm very happy to have you here at the Georgetown Club, and I'm very happy to welcome our guests, Kathy Merrill Williams and Katharine Weymouth. A few things I want to say up front. I have worked for both of them at one time or another, but technically not too specifically right now. And I never could have really had them on the show before then, though I would have loved to, but now I can say anything I want to them, so it's okay. But you know, I've known both of them for a long time. Kathy used to be my next door neighbor, but it seems to me you've both known each other for so long too. In fact, before we started taping, I realized I could just sit here and let you two talk, because that's what you do when you get together, right?
We would have fun.
You do, yeah. I mean, sure. And I was
if the bar was open, it would be
we
really
can do
fun.
that too, you know? I mean, I'm not responsible. You need drinks, we'll get them. But there's so much that you have in common, but just off the top of it, in a personal way, you're both parents, you're mothers. I assume you're approximately the same age.
She's younger, I think.
Well, you know, you both look very young to me.
Why, thank you.
And you are what they like to call media scions of Washington, and you both sort of came into your legacies in interesting ways that we will get to in as we talk. But I thought that maybe we would just start off talking about where you're from, because while your family seems like fundamental Washington, you are not a Washingtonian.
Right. I was raised in New York.
Born in New York too?
Born in Boston, raised in New York.
Born in Boston, raised in New York, and you came here when?
Right after law school, so 1993.
To work?
Yes, to work at a law firm, Williams and Connolly. Mm-hmm.
And you aren't born here either.
I was born about 7 blocks from here.
Oh, I take that back.
At Columbia Hospital for Women.
And then you were taken home to Annapolis.
Then yes, a year later or so I was taken home to Annapolis. So I grew up in Annapolis, but we grew up spending a lot of time in Washington too. We came in very frequently.
Because the family business was
right.
in Washington. You were born into your family owning the Washington Post. Your grandmother, Catherine Graham, was the publisher. Your great-grandfather founded it. Your family bought the magazine. Your family was already in publishing. Mm-hmm. You had newspapers out in Annapolis and Maryland. And they bought the magazine when, 2000?
They bought it in 1977.
1977.
Yeah.
So how old were you? Do you remember it?
Yes, I was 9. Mm-hmm. I remember it. We had a family vote on whether we should buy the magazine. I voted against it.
What was your reason, Kathy?
It was, now that I have children, it's so easy to see, is that my father explained that this would be a great opportunity. It'd be really fun. It was something he wanted to do. But because we lived in Annapolis, he would have to commute, so he would be away from home more. And so I voted no, because I wanted my dad around more. And so he said what he always said, thank you, this is not a democracy, it's a benevolent dictatorship, but we'll take your opinion into account. Yeah. Thank God he bought the magazine. So
worked out well.
We owned Baltimore Magazine at the time, so.
You did? I didn't know you did. Mm-hmm. I know you owned the Annapolis newspaper and newspapers, so you had already had a foot in the in the magazine business. But that wasn't really your world then, was it? I mean, when were you aware that your family was publishing and what publishing was? And
I grew up in a newspaper family. The local we published a local newspaper in Annapolis and the 5 newspapers around it. And if you grow up in a newspaper family, I'm sure you had this too, people talk to you all the time about what's in the paper. Mm-hmm. They blame you, they ask you questions.
Like your teachers in school?
The teachers in school, the kids would come up a lot and say, you spelled my name wrong, I'm on the JV lacrosse team, and I scored a goal, and you spelled whatever, with this, right. You said my name was Stein, I-E-N, and it's E-I-N, or whatever. And I started out, I would say, sort of watching my parents, how they dealt with people, I would say, you should check with your coach, because maybe they spelled your name wrong on the roster. And oftentimes the photographer takes a picture of the roster. And your name, they would say, my coach knows how to spell my name. It's your paper, it's your bad fact checking, blah, blah, blah. And then as I got older, I switched to, oh, thank you for letting me know. Let me see, I'll see if I can send a message back through my father. But you might want to check with your coach on the roster. Because you couldn't say, the local newspaper doesn't know every JV lacrosse player in the county. They just take a picture, which is what they still do everywhere, to know who is who. So I knew from an early age, and we would go start the presses when I was like 4 or 5 before OSHA laws. We would go in, we'd play, we'd be covered in ink.
Loved it.
I can't remember not knowing the presses starting.
Catherine, growing up in New York, you were sort of spared being the family, right?
Yep.
I mean, when were you first, introduced to the paper and the reality of the paper and going to the paper? Were you just a little girl? Would you go with your mother?
Well, my initial introduction was when I was 9, and I'm sorry to say that I was a scab, and I crossed the strike lines to help roll the papers up so we could get them out during the strike. So that must have been 73. And I grew up in a newspaper family. My mother was a complete political junkie. She and her boyfriend used to fight over who got the newspaper first. She would grill us at the dinner table over, had we read this story and did we know what was going on in the Middle East? And of course, we had no idea what was going on in the Middle East. And I knew my grandmother was a successful businesswoman and deeply involved in the paper, and I saw all the President's Men, so stuff like that. But I didn't grow up in Washington.
How old were you when you saw all the President's Men? Do you remember?
No, but young.
Yeah.
I mean, 9, 10, something like
And
that.
I just wonder at that age, when you're looking at the screen, intellectually and emotionally, how you're dealing with it.
I don't think we really understood
You just thought, you were
what
able
it
to enjoy
was,
it as
but
a
we
movie?
knew it involved my grandmother and the paper. And
Since Watergate was, pervasive throughout the land and the world, did you have to deal with people coming up and talking to you about it when you were in school, when you were in high school?
No, although
They did not relate that to
not
you.
about Watergate. I mean, I think they knew who my family was, and I was voted in high school most likely to become publisher of the New York Post. Tells you about my sensibilities. Oh, I want to be a headline writer for the New York Post in my next life.
And control page 6.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing to me about both of you is that you both assume kind of control of your companies at young ages in different ways and different paths. You, I gather, were groomed all along for the path you would eventually take. Though nobody was maybe saying it specifically, but your uncle before you, Don, had come up through the company, and was it always just assumed that in one way or another you would end up working at the Post?
No,
No?
not at all. I mean, I went to law school. I was going to be a prosecutor. I clerked. I went to work at Williams and Connolly. I intended to stay in the law. I guess my uncle started talking to me about the paper in law school, and I was sort of like, oh, that's nice, but I really didn't have any intention of joining the family company. And it was only once I came to Washington and started talking to him, and then they had an opening in the legal office, and I had just finished a trial, and one of the partners sent around an email to all the associates saying, they're short-staffed, one lawyer. We've agreed to lend them an associate for 3 months. It won't.
Who would be at the Post
Who would
building?
be at the Post. It won't count against you on partner track. Is anybody interested? So I called him up and I said, yeah, because I thought that would be a great way to dip my toe in without making a
Right.
commitment, because I didn't know what it would be like to work for a family company. And if I would like it, what if I didn't? And that would be awkward. But just going for 3 months would let me test it out.
What year was that? Was your grandmother still alive?
Yes.
So you were in the same building together.
Yes.
Did you go pop up and have lunch with her?
A little bit, but not very much.
I understand lunch in her office could be very interesting.
Yeah, of course. She had great people come in and out. But I tried to kind of
Just
be a lawyer and do my job.
And Kathy, for you, it's a very different journey and very sad because your father had a very untimely death, and you were not working in the family business at the time. you were selling Easy Pass at a more executive position than that. It's not like you were in the booth selling Easy Pass, but you were working with a company.
I took my turn in the booth.
You did take your turn
I
in the
lasted
booth.
about 3 hours.
We'll get to the secrets
Delaware
of Easy Pass.
Memorial Bridge. Yeah.
But your father died an untimely death, and it was interesting to me in reading about you that your father was not convinced that family businesses should be passed on to the family.
No, he was pretty convinced that they shouldn't be.
Should not be.
Should not be. And the statistics prove that. I might have these statistics slightly wrong, but I think it's 60-some% of family businesses fail second generation. I think 90% fail third generation. And then weirdly, fourth generation, they succeed. If you can make it through the three, the fourth, the whatever it is, the moxie comes back, so to speak. But those are the stats. So he really felt strongly against it. He told us our whole life, hey, go live your life. And he would say, your mother and I came from nothing, and we made a life for ourselves and a good life for ourselves. We've given you a first-class education. We've given you experiences around the world. If you can't make something of your life, that's your problem, not our problem, essentially. So the onus was on us. And then in my sort of late 20s, early 30s, we have a family meeting every Thanksgiving. It's a
For
day
your philanthropy, right?
For our philanthropy. It's a day of giving thanks, Thanksgiving. So we would discuss as a family where we want to give. And at those meetings, it would come up, Kathy might be a fit. I was a partner in a management consulting firm for 7 years, and then I worked for a large government contractor. I would say running Easy Pass, helping run Easy Pass. I worked for Michael Huerta, who's now head of the FAA. And so I was on a business track in life. And yes, my father passed away, and I took over, so it was kind of scary.
And your siblings, you have a brother and sister, they weren't interested.
No, my older brother's an engineer, my younger sister's an environmentalist. They're the most supportive people. And one of the things I get asked this question a lot about them is that we had a lot of open communication. I mean, my father would say, hey, one day, Kathy loves Washington. I mean, at that point, I had lived in Washington for 17 years. She loves it. She loves media. I'd done some media projects and management consulting. So he would sort of say, I think this would be a good fit, and then he'd say.
But he also told you he was going to be around for another 20 years.
Yes.
So don't
Go live your
count on
life.
it. Yeah, right.
Go live your life, and he'd say, because I would, if I ever said to him, well, can I come work there, or can I? He'd say, well, do you write? Because I'm not that good of a writer. Can you edit? I'm not particularly a good editor. Can you sell advertising? Well, I haven't really ever sold advertising. He's like, what would you do every day? Those are the 3 major jobs.
And yet you were thrown into it, and you didn't have any choice, and you just had to survive. You had to make it work. There wasn't an option two.
No, but I will say this, that one of the things, there's 2 things he told me that really helped guide me. One was I once said to him, well, what if one day I take it over and I drive it into the ground and I ruin it? And I remember he said, he goes, I'll be dead, won't bother me. I won't be there. But that's sort of a whole weight off your shoulders of not,
Right.
That was his answer. And then the other thing he used in a lot of different things he talked about, and there's a Latin phrase for this, which I won't say because I can't say it properly, but called hand from the grave. And if you try to do the wishes of people who have passed away, you're sure to fail. And so I just thought, okay, I'll give it a try. If I run it into the ground, I run it into the ground, and I can't do it the way he would want to do it. I'm not as smart as him, and not.
You just have to be yourself.
I just have to be myself.
Your grandmother died an untimely death too. She had a fall, I think, at Sun Valley.
Yeah.
And so you didn't see that coming. Had there been time, and I know you two are very close because in the time that I was very fortunate, in the time you were my next door neighbor, I got to meet your grandmother at your house in that very kind of casual grandmotherly way, when she would just be coming over to be at one of your parties. And she was such a lovely woman and so easy to talk to, I found. Did you two ever have the time to have the kinds of conversations that Kathy had with her father about the future's now looking like maybe this might happen?
No, we didn't really have conversations about the business going forward. I mean, we would talk about history or her growing up. or we would just gossip. I would tell her about my dating life, and she would laugh. So no. I mean, I
Did
wish
she tell
I
you
had
about her
been able
dating
to.
life?
No, I did ask once.
Yeah.
She didn't tell me a whole lot.
I will say this: my dad used to have lunch in Catherine.
So we're
her
finding out
grandmother's
something
office.
about the two
So
of
they
them.
would
Sweet.
talk.
Yeah.
That you didn't know
It's a
that?
deep,
I have a
no,
great
we did know
picture
that.
of
It's,
the two
it's,
together.
it's a,
But she mentored you, I'm sure. If not,
well, I
if
think she
not
was
as
an
one-
inspiration for
Yeah,
me more
yeah.
than consciously mentoring me. And I got lucky because when I met her, she was already successful and she was
Catherine
relaxed
Weymouth.
about it,
Yeah.
and she was working. She was still working, but she wasn't working as hard, and she was writing her book for a lot of it. So I got her at a great point in her life when she had time, and I'm named after her. So we just had a kind of personal connection. It was just easy. And
What's that
fun.
like being named after her? Other than having to make sure people spell it correctly.
Yes, that's the biggest obstacle. That's how I know who my friends are. It was great. I think because she was my grandmother and not my mother,
Yeah.
I didn't feel, you can't, kind of like Kathy said, you can't try to be somebody or live
Yeah.
up to somebody. You just can do the best you're going to do.
When she was writing her book, did you read any of it in galleys? Did you?
I read the galleys when
Yeah.
they were ready.
And did you discuss it with her? I mean, were there things you
Yeah.
learned in it that you didn't know?
Yes, of course, because you don't really sit down as a family and say, by the way, this is what happened with my mother, and my mother was a bitch, and
No, I thought that's what families do.
Well, they might say it in passing, but you don't know all the details.
Right,
So
right,
no,
right.
I really didn't know very much about her growing up, and I met her mother before she died, but I didn't know her.
Yeah.
So I probably learned more about her personal stuff. I think I knew some of the business
Yeah, the
stuff.
transitional phase is so interesting to me. When she suddenly has this business and a tragedy in her life too, because her husband killed himself. There's so much to learn, especially as women, I think, to come into these boys' clubs. At the time that she came into the Post, less so when you came into the Post, less so when you came into Washingtonian, but still, it's there. There were a lot of lessons to be learned from her experience of coming into that environment and being basically freaked out. I mean, initially, don't you think she was? And then she sort of dug in her heels and owned it.
Well, it was understandable she was freaked out. I mean, she was in early 40s. She'd stayed home to raise 4 kids, and overnight she took it over. But as she wrote in her book, she didn't take it over thinking, okay, I'm going to be CEO.
Yeah.
She took it over thinking, I'm going to steward it until my son is ready to take over.
Well, and she has always made very clear she had Ben Bradley, who she thought helped her get to where she needed to get to. Who did you two have who helped you as you stepped into these very big roles
I know your
as
person.
publishers?
My person, we have someone at the magazine who Mike Johnson, and also a man who's passed away, Rick LePere, who was sort of a great. He helped David Bradley buy The Atlantic. He was a great counsel to my father.
He was practically in the office with us.
Yeah. And my father had sort of given him free office space to run his business and said, hey, I just like your brain nearby. I'll cut out a corner for you, sort of outside our office. But if you run your business out of there, then I can have access to your brain. So Rick LePere, and then our CFO, who still is, my rock.
Mike Johnson.
Yeah.
Are these people who can tell you things, and Rick when he was alive, and Mike, that you may not want to hear?
Absolutely, absolutely. But I also believe in calling. I am someone who always calls people for advice on the subject that I think they're best suited to answer. So if I have issues, I've called Catherine a gazillion times to say, what should I do about this editor? What should I do about this situation? Or what should I do? And you call, or I might.
And vice versa.
Yeah, mom things. Everyone in life, you have all these friends, and I think often people go to the wrong person for the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So if I'm struggling with my 9-year-old and getting him to do his homework, I will find one of my friends who's been through that and be like, how did you, what are the tricks of the trade? So
It's so wonderful that you have that with each other, because there really isn't anybody else who are in the roles you are in or have been in. I mean, as young women, parents, with these iconic institutions that you're at the helm of.
mushy is not fun, but I feel so lucky to have Catherine.
Back at you.
Catherine, who there may have been more than one, but I mean, who served a guiding role for you? Because you had your uncle, obviously,
Yes,
Don.
yes.
But was there somebody else who wasn't in the family who you felt, not Kathy, who maybe in the post hierarchy, who helped you when you were like scratching your head?
I was lucky. I think I had a lot of great people. Alan Spoon, when he was still at the company, was a great advisor, and we also had an amazing board of directors. When I joined, Melinda Gates was on the board of directors, Warren Buffett was on the board of directors, and of course...
And Warren Buffett was very close to your
He was
grandmother.
very close to my grandmother, and I had kind of grown up with him. I had never talked to him about business before, but I took advantage of the opportunity when I needed it, and of course, it's very comforting to have Warren Buffett to bounce ideas off of. And my uncle was very present, and of course the paper was his baby. He had run it for so long. And he gave me the best advice when we were talking about me taking over as publisher, and I was terrified. And he said, Katharine, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just have to know who the smartest people are and rely on them.
Sorry.
And it made me feel so much better, because I thought, okay, I know I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I also am totally comfortable finding those people and like Kathy said, finding the people who are strong in those areas and going and relying on them.
No, Don took me out to lunch. I must have been at Washington a month, and he gave me very similar advice. And he said, "Hey, when you hire people, pick people that not only are really smart, but they're going to attract other smart people.
Right.
And then
So
rely on them.
who can they bring with them?" And It was really good advice, because now when I interview people, I think, oh, they're very smart, but would people want to work for them or work with them?
There is something that you two do, though, that's always been interesting to me, where it does intersect with a man, and that's David Bradley, who you've already mentioned, who founded Atlantic Media. And the three of you get together for lunch periodically?
Yep. We called it our publisher's lunch.
Yeah. And do you talk about publishing at all, or do you just gossip? No.
We do, actually. We talk about business a lot, and I mean, as you know, and as everybody here knows, it has been a very tumultuous period for media, for all of us, and we're all in the trenches. So it was great to be able to know that you could speak confidentially to people who are doing exactly the same thing you are, just in slightly different ways. So yes, of course we gossiped, but we also shared.
Did you tell the two of them before you told anybody else that you were going to sell the Washington Post?
No.
You had to keep that
That
poker
was-
face?
that was-
Did they get mad at you then at your next lunch that you
I
had?
think they understood that was the kind of thing you couldn't tell anyone. I mean, in part, we're a public company. You cannot give material information like that. But it was also the kind
So
of
it
thing that
was
was
only
too
like
good to keep. I could say to her, "Don't tell anybody," and she'd tell one person, and no, you couldn't.
Yeah.
But I can't even imagine what the decision process must be like when you have to basically keep it in the family, and yet it's such a gigantic decision to make. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was an easy decision for you.
No, it was not easy, and it was not easy for the Don or the family.
Was there a hurdle you had to cross that you remember?
I don't know. It was not one moment, but as I looked out ahead, and I had gone to Don, and I said, look, here are the three strategic paths that I see. One is we can keep treading water like we've tried to be doing, like cut costs as much as we can, but preserve the newsroom as much as we can, but ultimately that is not sustainable. Or I can cut costs very aggressively. We can get back to being a profitable newspaper, but you need to understand that it is not going to be the Washington Post we know and love, and you got to have my back if you want me to do that. And the board has got to have my back, and we've all got to understand that. Or, and I said, I know this is unthinkable, but we should at least discuss the option of doing what my great-grandfather did, which is a wealthy businessman who had the means and the interest and who cared about the mission, who was able to buy it, take it private, and invest in it for years. I mean, my grandmother wrote in her book that he bought it in 1933. She wrote that in 1947, he was as happy as a little boy because the paper was finally going to lose only $2 million. And that was his money, and of course that was a lot more in today's dollars, and I think it finally broke even in 1955. So it was unthinkable when we first talked about it, and then over time, I just said, look, I think we have to have this conversation as a rational conversation. We don't have to do anything, but we ought to have this conversation. And it became clear after talking it through a couple times and talking about it with the board, that, it's like, if you really love something, you set it free. And if we really wanted the Washington Post to thrive, and if you really care about the mission, we had to give it the best chance it could have. And that was, and of course we got very lucky finding a guy who's very wealthy, who cares about the mission, and who is able to invest and experiment for a long time. And the Post is doing so great. They have beat the New York Times for 3 months in a row in terms of uniques. They went from, it was like 26 million uniques when I was there. They're at 72 million uniques now.
The new headquarters is
beautiful.
Astonishing. Was it always only Bezos, or did he have competition?
No.
Was there a bidding war?
No, because we did it very privately. We weren't going to do an auction, but we, the board, Don, thought hard about who are the right people who would be good stewards for the paper and who have the means to do it and who might be interested.
And he approached them?
Yes, he approached them.
Now, your company, when your father died, you were a much bigger company, and you too decided to change it up. You kept Washingtonian, but you got rid of everything else, right?
Correct.
Why?
Well, there were two other businesses we had. We had newspapers and we had real estate. The newspaper business, even at the time, it was 2006. The tide had turned already, and it was clear that we certainly, and I certainly, didn't have the vision forward. I mean, magazines are still doing really well as a category, and we've been profitable every year through the recession. So I'm very proud of that. Newspapers have had really, really different struggles, and our newspapers that we sold in Annapolis have started to come back now. They're finding their way. I mean, people are realizing there's sort of a move towards, citizens will cover the school board, until they figure out that no one is that brain dead that they can sit through for 6 hours of it. You have to pay a reporter to do that, because no person will, submit themselves to that voluntarily. But so I could see that I wasn't gonna fix that, and so we sold those. Real estate, we got lucky because we sold right before the recession, but it just, for tax purposes, for other purposes, it was, my father had real estate partners that, we knew, but we weren't close with. It seemed odd. And
so your stewardship of the magazine started in a relatively financially comfortable position, because you sort of shored up your resources
yes and no. I mean, to be technical, all those other resources went to my mother. Okay. And so the magazine came to me.
Well, it was good for her.
Standalone.
I started with only with what the magazine had, and that's why we started adding a lot more magazines. As you know, we added a bridal magazine. We got the website really invested in and growing, an events business, a welcome guide. So we've added a lot of products because it can't survive on one product alone. So I had to build it, from a base that was pretty flat and get through those tough recession years. But I didn't have that other nest. And by the way, that's why we make a profit every year. We have to. So when we have lunch, I sometimes say, to David, David, you founded not $2 billion companies, 2 multi-billion-dollar companies. You have. You can afford to, if you lose... To invest, and if you lose a lot of money in a year, we have to make a profit every year. So... and we have a nice nest egg, but not that. Not that
interesting. No, and so the Washington Post sold the Washington Post company sold the Washington Post. You kept basically everything else and turned it into Graham Holdings.
Correct.
And you stayed on as publisher for a little while.
For a year.
Did you think you were going to stay on longer than you did?
No.
Did you make peace with leaving when you did?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, I was more surprised that Bezos wanted me and the team to stay. I wrote him right away and I said, look, obviously you have every right to pick your own publisher, and should. That's just what the owners do, right? So I was pleased that he wanted the team to stay for a year, just because I thought that would make the transition a lot smoother. And it was great, and it was fun to be able to start investing again. And But when I left, I was ready to do other things.
And Graham Holdings, it's not like you left media altogether, because Graham Holdings, Kaplan, the education part of it is a very big part of it,
Yeah.
but you still are a media company. You own TV stations?
We own 5 TV stations. We own Slate.
Slate, right?
And Foreign Policy
Right.
magazine.
So you are still...
But that is the TV stations are a huge moneymaker.
Yeah.
The
other
Slate
two
and
are
Foreign Policy are
little
small,
boutique.
but fun to still own.
Now, it's always interesting to me, your friendship, because the Washingtonian for years ran a column called Postwatch?
Yes, I think Harry Jaffe.
I think Harry Jaffe's in the room. And I don't know if it drove the family crazy, but it drove Ben Bradley crazy, right?
Yeah.
And was Postwatch still in existence as you two were becoming friends?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And was Catherine ever like, WTF, Kathy?
Never.
Why'd you
No.
run that?
Not once.
No, I remember though I did call.
Or did you leak
Don.
things to Harry
No, but
Jaffe?
I called Don once. I saw before it went to print, but it wasn't printed. That Don was dating his now wife. And we wrote a piece. I think Harry wrote a piece about that, and I sent him a note saying, "Hey, I just want you to know that this is coming out." So I felt sort of the professional courtesy that
Is Harry just finding out this for the first time that you?
I think he's finding out
I
for the first
doubt it.
time, but it doesn't change what's written.
Yeah.
But I mean, a lot of people do that in our business,
as a
where
courtesy.
it's a courtesy to say, "Hey, this is coming your way." Know
Well,
about it.
with the Post on the strong footing that it's on now, do you think Postwatch should come back?
Oh,
I think-
God, I hope not. For their sake.
Well, not Graham Holdings Watch.
But no, it's like Media Watch. It's just
Now we made
expanded, which
made
I
it
think makes
media-
more sense.
We've made it more Media Watch, which is, it's a reflection of the changing world
True,
of
true,
media.
but still, the Washington Post is
The thing about it is there's few things that unite our whole region. I mean, you really have the Redskins used to have local news broadcasters. Every time we put Jim Vance on the cover, the magazine sells like crazy because it's one of the things that
But if you put an athlete
knows.
on, it didn't.
Yeah, athletes don't sell at all.
Which
They
is
don't
which
sell
is
at all.
surprising.
Yeah.
And the Washington Post.
Right.
When you think of other things that unite the people out as far as Manassas and Annapolis and Frederick and wherever South Point you want to pick, it's hard. There's not a lot of things. I mean, Woody's and Hex, and there used to be a lot of things that united our region more.
Yeah.
And we've just gotten a lot
What
bigger.
what does it mean to you
The
to be
Post
a
is one of those
Washingtonian? What does it mean to you?
I mean, I love it. I'm proud to be Washingtonian and from a Washingtonian family, and
in the
having
city?
moved from New York. I mean, this was a choice of mine to move here. I love it. It's fun. It's interesting. It's changed a lot. We now have great restaurants, and they're on the cover right there.
Yeah, exactly.
But it really, I mean, the city has evolved a lot in the last 10 years. But it's, livable. I mean, my mother makes fun of me. She thinks I live in suburbia because I have, a yard and 3 dogs. But I'm still in the city.
You're inside the city lines.
Yeah.
And you live in the city too.
Right in
What
the
does
city.
being a Washingtonian mean to you?
I love it. I think it's the greatest city on earth. And I say that with the pride of being a Washingtonian. But if you look at cities that really affect the world, and if you go way back, there's always been some city driving the world economy, whether it was Constantinople, whether it was London at the turn of the century in the 1900s, and really post-recession, Washington even more so, because it used to be, well, New York's finance, LA is entertainment, and Washington is sort of boring policy. But then the recession was like, oh wait, all the finance decisions are really made there, and then every company headquarter
Yeah.
in the world now has an office here. And so I think the whole world's eyes are on Washington, and it's got great schools.
But it's
and great
also
people
diversified
and-
a lot now in terms of industry, which, I mean, we now have technology here, and we have startups here, and it's really, it used to be government and media and lawyers.
And what's that club that you're both, the economics club? Is it
Yeah.
called the Washington Economics Club? I mean,
It's all business leaders, yeah.
it's just a slice of Washington that doesn't make the network news.
Yeah.
It's that kind of fundamental bedrock part of the city where there are businesses, there are people who are doing it all from
I know.
right here.
People
which
think
is-
we all, I'm sure everyone's had this where you go somewhere and they're like, what are people talking about in Washington?
You're like, I
the
have
same
no
thing they're
inside
talking about
scoop.
in your town. Like Trump, the election.
Yeah, when are you going to put him on the cover?
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens at inauguration, but
No decisions
no,
on
it is.
that
It
yet.
is. We have such a great city from that world, but then from local, like nice people. I mean, everyone's been invited to a welcome this person to town party.
Yeah.
The other cities don't have that.
Yeah.
They don't have that sense of, here, someone moved here, let's welcome them, which is so part of our culture. I love living here. I love everything about our city. And I mean the region when I say that.
Do you find, especially when you were publishing the Post and still now publishing Washington, how do you get out in the city beyond the neighborhoods you know? Do you seek out events that, I mean, much like a mayor needs to get to the whole city, how did you do that, or how do you do that? Do you go see Anacostia? Do you go to the different wards? Do you know the city council members?
Getting around the city I find very easy, and I do, and I wish I got more invitations to Anacostia, and I said that somewhere, and the next day Cora Masters-Berry called me up, said, come tomorrow, tour the Southeast Tennis Center, and I went down.
Pretty stunning to go see it.
And tour it. I go to the Arc. That is easy. It's harder to get further out in the suburbs. Like I was in Frederick for something recently, and I'm like, wow, we've written about it.
That's pretty amazing.
And I'm like,
too.
this is a cool town. I do see why people. So I think the farther out suburbs, but we all have friends, and our kids have friends that live in different places. So, but keeping track of things in the city is just a matter of saying yes to invitations to things. I think. I would run into you at all kinds of things, so I know you had the same.
If you didn't live here, where would you live? I mean, do you have a place that you...
Paris.
Where? Paris?
Paris.
Very good choice.
Colorado.
Nice
Oh yeah, that'd be good
choice.
too.
Yeah.
We could do both.
Kathy, if Jeff Bezos decided to expand his portfolio and buy Washingtonian, would you sell it to him?
That's a really good question. I would say, everything has a price, but I cannot imagine what that would be. It's so out of my realm of thought.
Has the family ever
idea
discussed a
of-
world after Washingtonian? I mean, that you might consider selling it?
No, I can't see passing it down to my children.
Interesting.
I don't. I want them to find their passion and their love in life and pursue
you
that.
would not want to see them go into media?
I would not want to see them.
Would you want to see your children go into media?
If they wanted to. My oldest daughter's writing for the school newspaper. We didn't discuss it. She just started doing it, and I was like, "That's so cool." And now that we sold the paper,
Yeah,
I
now
mean,
that there's some distance.
Yeah.
whatever their
can't-
passion
but
is.
I need a job.
You need a job now.
I
could get another
love
job.
my job. I love my
You
job.
could
So
press out-
selfishly, I would say that I could never imagine that because I really, really love it.
Yeah.
And so it would be like asking anyone to give up something they love.
You could sail around the world.
I would do that in a
Kathy is
I
the
would do that in a heartbeat.
take a
That would be
sabbatical.
That would be my.
Yeah, Kathy is a sailor, and you, when Kathy was
But we might end up divorced, my husband and I.
Oh,
at the
there's
end.
that. We don't
That would be the
want that.
risk.
when Kathy had sailing growing up, you had ballet,
Yeah,
and at some point you made a critical decision that you weren't going to be a ballerina.
I did. It was very wrenching. Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I was at the School of American Ballet, which is the one that feeds into New York City Ballet. It was very competitive, very hard, and I loved it. But my mother
Was it like that
was
Black Swan
actually
movie?
great. No, nothing like that. Although there were a lot of girls vomiting in the bathroom, but and I was a lot skinnier. But my mother was great, actually, and I came to the point when I had to choose whether I was going to leave my school and go to a professional school that revolves around the ballet schedule. And she said, look, if you love it enough to know that if you end up in the corps ballet in a small town, if you love it enough to do that, then that's fine. But if you don't, then you might want to think hard about getting a college education. And I knew that I wasn't good enough to be a principal ballerina anywhere. And so I did love it, but I thought, I should get a backup. I should get an education.
You've both had to hire editors, which is probably the biggest part of the job, I would think, other than just managing the families of staff. You had 2 editors, and you've had 2 editors. Is that just the biggest challenge? What was it like trying to find the right editor for you and for your publications?
It was easier for me because I had Catherine's advice. I mean, I could call her a lot about that.
So you
But I
just
didn't
put it
know
on
who
her.
you should hire.
Yeah, I mean, about questions to ask. But I found it, the first time it was an internal person. The second time, it sounds crazy, but it was kind of fun because I interviewed all these people, and one of the things I asked them, and maybe you had suggested it, but I said, hey, what do you think is wrong with our magazine now, and what do you like about it? And so I got such a great education.
I remember you being stunned by that.
Well, I think I was stunned that, this sounds crazy, but I was stunned that I had questioned my own gut instinct. The things that I thought were wrong with it, all these other people thought were wrong with it too. And sometimes you sort of forget that, you know.
Did that change you? Did that change you as a publisher and the way you viewed your company?
Yeah, it did. It made me trust my instincts more, for sure. And I really, really learned so much in the process of hiring, and I'm so happy with.
Do you think it
Michael
made you a
Schaefer.
stronger publisher? I mean,
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
And we had one editor, Jack Limpert, for 42 years, longest serving.
Who your father hired?
He was there when my father
was there?
bought
Oh,
the
really?
magazine.
Okay.
He's still on our masthead. He'd been at the magazine since '71, and longest serving magazine editor in the country. And really, really, really great editor. So sort of like your
Having Ben Bradley.
Ben Bradley. He's the Ben Bradley of magazines, and so, very difficult to find.
So when you were hiring your first editor, who was Marcus Braugley, was the specter of Ben Bradley? Did it make it more difficult, or did you just have to set that aside?
Yeah, it wasn't the specter of Ben Bradley, because I think Ben had been gone for a long time, and we had been lucky enough to have Len Downey for 20 odd years.
But
I think the challenge was the times were changing so much, and we needed somebody who was not just a great editor, but also very digitally focused, and also has a business sense. In this day and age, the editor also needs to understand the business, I think. But the Post also had a really insular culture. We had never, since Ben Bradley, never had an editor who did not. Len Downey started there as a summer intern and rose up the ranks. So I went outside because I didn't think the choice was inside, and that was very controversial. I knew it would not be well liked, and it's risky. It's risky to bring someone in from the outside. And there aren't that many editors in the world of the caliber that should run the Washington Post, and they are the leader of that newsroom, and that is the heart of the Washington Post. So Marcus was a terrific choice, in my view, having run the Wall Street Journal and run an integrated newsroom of print and online. He was really smart, and he knew that he had to shake things up in the newsroom, but keep what was great about it.
And then you transitioned to Marty Baron, who's now basically a movie star, and maybe getting an Oscar now.
Well, and Esquire magazine had the headline, "Is Marty Baron the best editor anywhere?" And I emailed Marty, I was like, oh my God. He was like, I know, it can only go down from here.
I remember reading an interview that you did, I think with Lloyd Grove, and you were talking about Steve Ballmer of Microsoft coming. Did he come to the Post and speak to your editors, or maybe just spoke to your executive staff? But whatever, the where and how isn't as important as that he said, and this was 2008, he made a declaration, he said that print won't exist in 10 years.
Yep.
But here we are, and it's almost those 10 years, and...
But everyone said that in 95 and 2005. I think no one in print business can read another article saying print is dead. It's literally, it makes your eyes glaze over.
The predictions of doom.
Magazines, last year, I think there were 1,107 new magazines launched last year. 1,107, just last year.
How many will make it? That's kind of like restaurants,
Yeah, it is. It is absolutely like restaurants, and they keep getting nichier and nichier and nichier. We're in a really good position, as are our friends in other city magazines, because people want something that is very service-oriented, that is local, and has a niche. That's why Newsweek, Business Week, they're so broad. They have many more issues. I was on a panel for Adobe in New York, and there was a guy on my panel who publishes knitting magazines online.
Yeah.
You've heard me say this. One of his magazines, and I don't make this up, one of the magazines is called Knitting Socks. And it's an entire magazine just for knitting socks. And I thought,
I hope it comes out once a year.
I've never seen a person with a knitted pair of socks. Do you have
They're hiding them in
a
their
hand-knitted pair of socks?
I do not.
But you can find these niches in the world now.
Yeah.
That exists that way. So I feel good about print. I do read my Post and print every day, but newspapers and news that
Yeah, I have a
is
friend who
today.
still has to have the newspaper. Well, many
A lot
still
of
have
people
to have
do.
the
I will tell you, more shocking than Balmer, and I think Balmer's been making those predictions, as have a lot of other people for years, was Don suggested that I go out to Silicon Valley and meet with some folks out there. And I met with Mark Andreessen in the very beginning of my tenure as publisher. And I said to him, if you were me, what would you do? And he said, Catherine, I would stop printing the Washington Post tomorrow. Because he said all of your competitors are 150% focused on digital. And as long as you have the paper, you're going to be too focused on the legacy. And I was like, oh my God.
But you didn't listen to him, I have to say that.
But, you know, it was jarring, and I think he was wrong. But, you know, it made us sit up and think, and we actually ran the numbers. What would it look like when the paper goes away? When it doesn't make sense to print it anymore, what does that world look like? And, you know, at least at that time, it would have made zero financial sense. We would have lost way too much money. And there's still a really strong audience, and that's where the ads work. I mean, the ads in the newspapers work.
I mean, even when you look at Politico that has so much online, they have their print piece that they put out. But it's
Well-
what people like to read in print. And
Our time is up. Can you believe it? It went like that.
We knew we'd had fun together.
I know,
Yeah.
no, I know. It was wonderful. I'm just so glad we finally got to do this. Kathy, Merrill Williams, Catherine Weymouth. I'm sure you're Kathy most of the time too, the two Kathys. But thank you both very much for doing this, and thank you everyone, and thank you everyone here. We'll see you at the next one with Diane Rehm.
Thank you, Carol.
Thanks.